What is actually about the mind-body problem? Are they connected? Are they completely different things? Are we only our mind? What is consciousness? Let's talk psychology. Today we are going to talk about the theories that approach the mind-body problem, and especially about those theories that don't give a proper solution for the mind-body problem because they're either not scientific or don't take the mind seriously. Namely, these are substance dualism, idealism, monism, and behaviorism. I will show what they are about and also their approach towards the mind-body problem. Then I will also explain why they're not solving the mind-body problem, which can be kind of disappointing, but stay tuned until one of the next videos because then I will show an approach which works. So let's get started. Before we go into the mind-body problem, we have to consider what is philosophy and why is it important for psychology. Philosophy can be described in 5 things. First, conceptual analysis shows us the relationship between different worldviews. Second of all, concept clarification answers the question what the concept is, also by turning to science. Thirdly, philosophy is a science of validity, so it makes us think about if our evidence and our conclusions support our hypothesis. Fourthly, it makes us change our perspective. And last but not least, it is a search for truth, as philosophia means the love for wisdom. And why is it important for us psychologists? There are 2 ways of looking at that. First of all, it improves our critical thinking towards ethical and analytical guidelines. Secondly, it makes us think about fundamentally psychological concepts such as the mind or psyche, consciousness, or the mind-body relationship. So let's start talking about what the mind and especially consciousness is about. Here we talk about mental states. The mental states of the conscious mind are thoughts, feelings, and sensations. This is pretty obvious to us because we experience them every second. There are 3 mental states to the conscious mind: phenomenal experiences, cognitive state, and emotions. I will quickly talk about each of them. In phenomenal experiences, we talk about qualia, aka what it is likeness, or basically how is something experienced. Cognitive state has intentionality, so it is about something, it has aboutness. Lastly, there are emotions, which are both phenomenal experiences and cognitive state. I shortly want to state the hard problem of consciousness. They seem to be completely intertwined and in unity, but at the same time they're completely different. Now we come to our main problem, the mind-body problem. The question we are asking goes as follows: how does the conscious mind fit into the physical world? As we have 3 mental states of conscious mind, we have 3 problems. However, because emotions is just a mix of the other states, we have 2 problems, which are namely, how do intentionality and qualia fit into the physical world? Let's consider the first try to solve this problem, namely substance dualism. In this context, we have to name René Descartes. Descartes disliked the way people in his time used skepticism. He wanted to find true knowledge by doubting everything which could deceive him: people, his senses, and also, therefore, his perceptions. However, he was certain that he was thinking, as doubting is a way of thinking. Cogito ergo sum. Then he changed his approach to find knowledge from doubting to what is very distinctly and clear is existent. One of these ideas being the idea of perfectionism. Because he isn't perfect as he's doubting, he can't be the origin of this idea. Therefore, there must be the existence of a God. In addition to that, Descartes accepts that he has a mind and body which exists in the physical world, among other things. By the way, physical things are moved by other physical things because they are extended, which brings us to substance dualism. We have 2 substances: res cogitans, which is the thinking, and res extensa, which is being a physical thing. Substances are things that can exist on their own. So now we know what substance dualism is and how Descartes arrived to this theory. However, there's a big problem, namely the interaction problem. How can the non-physical mind interact with the physical body? In that time, it was believed that our body is filled with animal spirits, which is material which moves our blood vessels. Descartes suspected that in the pineal gland, the soul can move the animal spirits, which therefore move the animal spirits in our body. This is the way how it is made possible that the mind and body can interact. The problem is still not solved. How is this interaction possible when the mind is not extended, not a physical thing, and cannot push the body to do anything? Descartes uses the analogy of heaviness. Heaviness moves our body without bumping into it. The problem with that is that the mind is a substance and heaviness is a property, so they cannot interact with each other. So we circle back to the hard problem of consciousness. Consciousness, the mind and body are completely intertwined and also at the same time completely different. That's absurd. One way to explain it is occasionalism. Here we bring God into the game. The only cause of an event is God. For example, we have the thought of an action. God enables the action, and therefore our body can move the action. Of course, this is not a scientific explanation. Another explanation also using God is parallelism. Basically, physical and mental actions don't interact with each other, but they are aligned and then controlled by God. But then the question arises, how does God do that? We can have a short look at PhiloPsychology, which is a way to explain that separability theory is true. However, there's no such thing because there's no evidence for it. One example is clairvoyance, which is also known as getting information about an event, person or object, not using our normal senses, but ESP, extrasensory perception. There are many anecdotes to that, but there's no clear evidence that this works. Another example is electronic voice phenomena. Here you hear voices in white noises from radio stations which are in between stations. However, you could simply hear words from another station, and also the studies done by those people are not scientific and not replicable. Let's conclude that dualism, so Descartes' first approach, takes the mind very seriously but not science. And substance dualism is not scientific because it takes God as an explanation for everything. Now let's ask the question if there's only mind and come to monism. This means that there's only res cogitans. To understand what monism is, we have to talk about empiricism, which says that knowledge about the world can only be gained through sensory experience. The most important representatives of empiricism were Locke, Hume, and Berkeley. Talking about empiricism, we have to accept that there are primary and secondary qualities or properties. In other words, we perceive something, which is our subjective perception, which is the secondary property, and then we have the thing we perceive, the primary quality. Berkeley goes a step further into idealism and says that everything in the world is mental. He follows the statement esse est percipi. You only exist if you are perceived. So everything exists only because it is perceived. There's no res extensas, there are no primary qualities. This is also part of immaterialism. The problem with that is that, for example, size, height, or temperature can be perceived differently but are still primary qualities. They're still the same. Another problem is the permanency of objects. When I close my fridge, the soup in it is not perceived, but it's still there, right? To explain this, Berkeley says, yes, it still exists because God perceives it. This makes this whole argument unscientific. So also monism and idealism cannot be taken seriously for our solution of the mind-body problem. Let's make a last attempt in this video, calling behaviorism. This is based upon the concept as follows. We have an input called stimulus. Then this goes into our mind, which is called the black box. And then we have an output called response. So, short recap, stimulus, black box, response. That's it. In behaviorism, we have two paths, the philosophical and the psychological. I will talk about both really quick. Psychological behaviorism is a response to introspection, which is subjective and not based on science. It's also called methodological behaviorism. Its goal is to predict and control behavior. They do it, for example, by conditioning, what they did with little Albert, for example. Philosophical behaviorism is also called linguistic or analytical behaviorism. They conclude that humans have a mind because they observe their behavior. But no one could really establish if we have a mind because it's observable at all. Behaviorists say we do a categorical mistake when we talk about the mind-body problem. The mind is nothing different than a set of dispositions, which is a pattern one displays under circumstance. In Skinner's words, human thought is human behavior. Therefore, we have a mind because we can observe our behavior. Let's take a last step to logical positivism. The aim is to paraphrase psychological statements from inner state statements to observation-based statements without the loss of meaning. Here comes the behaviorist dilemma. What is actually happening in this black box we were talking about before? This cannot be answered by behaviorists because it's just not observable. But if you want to study the mind, we better have an idea what it is, right? Behaviorists say mind is behavior. But isn't there more to behavior, for example, consciousness? There are two problems with behaviorism and logical positivism. Firstly, it's just not possible to paraphrase inner state statements to observation-based statements without the loss of meaning. Quick example, if you have pain in your belly, logical positivists would say, okay, you would rub your tummy, you would accept painkillers. But isn't there more to it? The feeling of illness, for example. The second problem is that thoughts are not studyable by behaviorists because they're just not observable. To conclude behaviorism, we can say that they take science really serious, but not the mind. Alright guys, we covered a lot today. We have seen three theories, namely substance dualism, monism, and behaviorism, which none of these are our solution to the mind-body problem. We have seen Descartes doubting and thinking and finding out that God exists. We have heard about occasionalism and parallelism and God's influence in that. We cannot only be our mind because there's height, size, or temperature, which are primary qualities. And lastly, we can't take behaviorism seriously for a solution for our mind-body problem, as they don't have any clue what's happening in this black box. So please stay tuned until one of the next videos from me, because there I will show an approach to the mind-body problem which actually works. So consider subscribing and leave a comment down below so I know what you thought about this video. Stay tuned and see you next time. Bye.